co-hosting with the World Bank. We feel that sharing experiences between trusted colleagues empowers everyone, from leaders to citizens, to feel prepared. And we know that cities with experience in pandemics are already showing better results. So we feel an urgency to help connect our global community and share knowledge through this series. We wanted to give an idea of who is on the line tonight. There are about 500 participants coming from over 50 countries around the world. There are about 95 representatives of cities and governments. There are about 100 people online from the World Bank. There are about 45 people from other international organizations and philanthropies. We have private sector academics with us, about 60 people, and civil society representatives, about 40. So we're really grateful to be doing this along with the World Bank team. And before I turn it over to Francis to say a few words on behalf of the bank, I just wanted to remind everyone of the ground rules for the speakers series. These series are organized, as I mentioned, for the purpose of knowledge sharing. While we record it for knowledge sharing purposes, it is not on the record. And if you want to attribute something to someone in a media article, you do need to reach out. We also are doing this in a webinar format this time. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A function. The questions will be collated in that chat function. And if you see a question you like, please vote for it, because then it will rise to the top of the queue. And during the Q&A section, we will select questions from that list to pose to the speakers. Please do include your name and your organization when you pose a question. Okay, with that, I will turn the microphone over to Francis.
Thank you, Lauren, and welcome everyone on behalf of the World Bank. I think it's clear, and there's no doubt, that cities are the first responders in the ongoing crisis. So Lauren and I have decided to join our two networks, the World Bank and the GRCN's network, to try to find the best possible speaker every week to share experience and make sure that every option are considered. Last week, we heard Professor Saini and Dr. Q from China share their first-hand account. I want to point out that China, which was at the heart of the crisis 2 months ago, has only experienced single-digit new cases every day last week, and actually no cases yesterday. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. After China, we thought that it would be essential to have speakers from cities who are now facing the brunt of the pandemic, Milan, for example, or actively preparing, like London. So in a minute, Lauren will introduce today's speaker, Alice and Piero. But before she does, I want, on behalf of my team, and I'm sure everybody here, thank them for dedicating time for this presentation. So Alice and Piero, obviously you're busy these days, but I want you to know how much we appreciate the fact that you've taken time to prepare and now to talk to us about your first-hand experience. I understand that we're at full capacity. I think Lauren just described the breadth of the participants, so hopefully your time will be worth your while. Back to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Francis. So I will just take a few minutes to introduce today's speakers. This is a very special webinar for us at the Global Resilient Cities Network, because both of the cities who will be presenting tonight are members of our network, which is a city-led and practitioner-focused network. And so we're really, really glad to have their firsthand accounts of what's going on and to be able to share their knowledge with you, with many of their colleagues and other chief resilience officers around the world, as well as with so many others, in the hopes that their work will inspire and provide support to all of you in these challenging times. So without further ado, I want to introduce Alice Reeves, who's the Deputy Chief Resilience Officer for the Greater London Authority. Alice is a resilience leader and a strategist that delivered London's first citywide resilience strategy. She has experience in strategic resilience planning, developing solutions for climate change, improving sustainability, preparing for emergency management and disaster recovery. This includes experience in developing strategic emergency response plans to shocks such as pandemic flu, cyber disruption, climate change, and extreme weather events. As Frances said, Alice, we're really grateful for you taking the time during all of the preparedness actions and responses there in London. Over to you.
Lauren, that's really kind. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you, Frances, as well. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon, this evening, for everyone else. So if you bear with me while I share my screen with you. Here we go. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alice Reeves. As Lauren said, I'm Deputy Chief Resilience Officer for the Greater London Authority. As of about 4 working days ago, I am now also Deputy Head of City Operations, specifically to deal with the coronavirus response here in London. Oh, hang on. I'm having a few problems with my screen. There we go. So London has been properly active in the Global Resilient Cities Network since November 2018. It's all fairly recent. And I have been in this role for a full year next week. So we've been on quite fast timelines to really start building networks and building resilience for our city and across with all our partners. We published our resilience strategy for London just over a month ago. It now feels like quite a lot more time than that. So how does resilience work in London more generally? We have a lot of partners that we work with to build resilience, specifically on emergency response. We have the London Resilience Partnership that looks after the planning for emergencies, and that includes any pandemic flu work. The London Resilience Partnership reports into the Mayor of London via our Deputy Mayor Fiona Twycross, and we work with well over 200 partners across London now, and our partners aren't just local government. We look at emergency responders, we look at utilities, we look at the voluntary sector. So all these people are involved in any emergency response that we run. So for pandemic flu planning, we have some very specific challenges in London that you may or may not recognise for your city or the cities that you work with. So we have very little in the way of local powers. The Mayor of London cannot manage health legislation. We have limited powers in terms of enacting any enforcement or closing schools within London. All of this lies with central government. And the pandemic flu response is led by our department, our Ministry of Health and Social Care. As I said, the specific London plans are managed through the London Risk Register by the London Resilience Partnership. It's interesting to note, and I was thinking about this as I developed the slideshow, that pandemic flu, any kind of flu, has been the #1 risk in London for at least the last 3 years. So this is not something that we haven't been planning for, but equally what has been happening now has also challenged our plans, as has challenged the way that we are prepared to respond to emergencies quite severely. And I think the other thing is that one of the limitations of working with national guidance on emergency planning is that not only do we have limited powers locally, but actually guidance is national. So at the moment, London is maybe 2 weeks ahead of the rest of the UK in terms of numbers that we're seeing and actions that we're taking, whereas the guidelines are national. They're not tailored to specifically fit our individual cities. So there is a challenge in there in taking national work and developing it for our city. And this will also apply for other regions across the UK. So where are we right now? Well, what can I say? My guess is that by the end of this presentation, things will probably have changed. They're moving so fast. We know that we're likely to expect more changes this afternoon, and we're waiting with bated breath to see what happens. So up until Monday, up until 4 days ago, there was testing and self-isolation for those who presented symptoms. Since Monday, we have moved to family quarantine, no community testing, but only testing in hospitals, and a request for people to work from home and minimize social contact, so full social distancing measures. Yesterday afternoon, it was announced that our schools will close on Friday. So what are we doing right now? We are working really hard within the next 24 hours to understand whether these social distancing measures are actually being enacted by the public. There are limited ways of finding that out, especially because we've stopped community testing, which becomes a very big challenge. And we're also looking to understand what the national legislation will mean for us as it goes through Parliament at the moment. We think it'll involve measures for things like social distancing, but again, we're trying to understand the word of the law and how that will apply to us. So as I said, we are a partnership emergency response. We work with people who operate across Londoners. Our priorities right now are really looking at what are the issues around vulnerable Londoners, about people who are maybe marginalised or do not have the opportunities to look after themselves when things get very difficult. And the third part of this is, and partly this is maybe why we're here today as well, I think, is we need to think about recovery, and we're already starting to do that. And this is where, as we learn and go through this, we can really make change. So our priorities at the Greater London Authority, we are lucky enough to have many, many thousands of volunteers in London, and a lot of parts of London actually rely to an extent on charities and on the voluntary sector. So we see this as being critical for London to keep working. At the moment, we have an additional £3 million of financial support for organisations that we are giving out, so they can still manage, they can still provide their services, even though their staff, they do not have the number of staff, the donations to them have gone down, and it's more difficult to operate. We're also setting up a task force for volunteering to coordinate the thousands of volunteers across London together. And this is the first time we've done this. It's still a learning process that we're going through, and it's to bring together all our volunteers so we can support the different charities who really need them at the moment. Obviously, one of the challenges in London is that our volunteers are mainly over 60 years old. What that means in reality is obviously we don't want them to be mixing with everyone in case they get ill. So we're also looking at how we can move our volunteer services to telephone calls, to web-based issues, web-based ways of managing, and use younger volunteers to help with picking up shopping, with medicines, with actual activities that may involve being outside for as long as we are still able to go outside, I should add. We are also doing some very urgent work on emergency food supply planning. We have very high levels of poverty in London, believe it or not. Many people rely on food banks. On Friday, when the schools close, we need to understand where the children are that are going to be going hungry, how we can manage to arrange food so that they aren't going hungry. We've already started with issuing tokens so families can identify themselves and get access to food. This is all being rushed through yesterday, today. It's all happening incredibly fast. The other part of this is obviously our homeless community. We are looking at booking hotel rooms, at using whole buildings and hostels to allow them to properly self-isolate and be looked after at the moment. We expect this to be able to be enacted within the next week. And the final thing is, this is London. We're trying to work with communities to do it in over 300 languages, which is very challenging, I should add. So the other side of this is obviously business. So the way we're managing this at the moment is we are all seeing the business sector change incredibly fast. It's not just about people moving to work from home, but it's also about what sectors are being very severely affected. So we know tourism has been very severely affected. We know some small businesses are also being affected. We've put online specific coronavirus support, and please go to our website at the GLA, where it's up there now, and you can look for different information for your business. We've also started a campaign through social media to say, if you have a business, please come and look here. Here are ideas for you to help yourself. Specifically, this is about helping yourself at this point for businesses. We're not immediately looking at financial stimulus. There's a number of reasons for this, mainly because we don't know how this is going to develop for London. The likelihood is that financial stimulus will become available, and we've already started looking at the really badly hit areas such as the nighttime economy, which is a priority for our mayor, and music venues, which many have been closing down in London over recent years. So we know that they're a very high risk area. So we've looked at small grants for them, but at this stage, we haven't gone much further than this, other than to keep collecting data to analyse and understand as the situation changes. So one of our priorities here is having a business cell within the Greater London Authority that is gathering data to try and understand and help the mayor respond to the situation as it develops and make data-driven choices on where the need is greatest within the business sector. So what have we learned so far? I know in London we're maybe quite a long way behind many of the cities that you are or that you work with. But these are the things that have come up with us within the last few weeks that have really made us think about the response we had prepared and how we need to adapt it to be effective. So our continuity as local government, our continuity is actually critical to the city keeping running. So our internal plans will have, and the success of our internal plans will have an effect on how everything else keeps running. So we were halfway through a rollout of IT change when this happened. We have had to shift a huge amount of resource around so that overnight we could move everyone from the Greater London Authority to working from home with enough equipment and phones to be able to work. It took 48 hours for us to be able to do that. It's not perfect and not everything is working, but this was something that we realize now actually planning for. Maybe in future we'll need to adjust our IT rollout plans because we never imagined for a minute how critical it was. Our testing for the whole IT and whether it would work with everyone online happened last Friday. So again, an idea of how fast for us this is moving as an organisation. Another part of this is, on the emergency response side, is we've learnt very fast that if we don't have responders on the ground, there's very little we can do. So our priority is also looking after them. We've been talking for several days now about what happens when transport shuts down, what happens when people are unable to move across the city. In London, I should explain that not many people have cars. Outside at the edges of London, people do. Centrally, people tend to rely on public transport. So we actually need to keep public transport running in order to make sure our responders can move around and provide healthcare, provide policing, provide a number of other things that are critical for our city to function. This also applies to community volunteers. We need to make sure that we understand what people are doing within their communities and how critical it is so that they can continue for as long as possible to continue providing those functions. And there are a number of other sensitivities that we're aware of with coronavirus, specifically around, again, London has so many communities. We need friends now because we know that there are some really complex, sensitive challenges around planning for excess deaths and mortuary capacity. we need to be able to speak to community leaders now, because we think that when the situation gets worse, burial arrangements will change, funeral arrangements may change, and this will have a really big impact on our communities. So we need to speak to people now to understand what different pressures are in different communities to be able to manage this effectively and take people along on our journey so they can work with us as best possible to make sure that we do what they need us to do. So I know in advance we had some questions from the attendees today, specifically on big events. I think one of the things for us that we noticed immediately is that people don't do what you ask them to do. So we had a lot of big events planned over the next few weeks, one of which was the St. Patrick's Day celebrations for our Irish community in London. We at the GLA were super keen for this to go ahead, for this to continue. Our medical advice was that being outside was not a problem. The numbers of attendees meant that we could go ahead, and it wasn't considered a high risk. However, the organisers said, we don't think so, we're not particularly confident about this, we're going to cancel. So in the end, the event didn't happen, not because we took that active choice, but because actually people decide to make their own choices. And I think that is something that we have learned that we need to be more sensitive to, I would say. We're also having similar issues at the other side of this. So the big events that have been cancelled, organisers want to postpone, they don't want to cancel. However, the UK is seasonal. The good weather only lasts until late September, mid-October, which means everybody wants a very, very small window for their event. So the weather is nice and people can be outside. Realistically, the strain that that will create on our city resources means that is not possible. And we're having to have quite challenging talks with event organisers around how some of them may need to cancel or may need to postpone up to a point where maybe the weather is not so nice, or think about doing it differently. And these are quite challenging talks right now anyway, because obviously we don't know about the longer term development. However, we do want to make sure that we can keep our communities active within the city. I think the other lessons, certainly for me so far, is that staying agile involves planning, amazingly. And we are trying to understand that we don't want everyone just to be coronavirus and nothing else. The world will continue turning, things will continue developing in our city. How can we plan over the next 6 months to a year to not stop all of our functions? What functions are critical, and what things do we need to think about right now that will help us when we eventually emerge at the end of this process? And a final point, and I think this is something Piero and I were talking about last week, is that we already want to be planning for the future. And this is not something we can do alone. This is something that we can collectively learn from. This is something that actually is still changing moment by moment, certainly for us. And trying to understand and sculpt what that new normal may be, especially now when we're not sure, is not only interesting, but I think is something that is really developing, certainly in London, with our partners. So we're trying to involve our partners as much as possible, be that business, be that charities, be that many, many other people, in what they see, what has changed for them in London, what will be changing, and how they see the new normal as being when we eventually come back outside and start leading lives again. And to me, I think one of the take-home things from this is that we've learned so much already from the cities who are ahead of us and who are ahead in terms of response and everything else. And that collaborative work, especially now that we are all in rooms, in flats, and a very long way away, but actually almost closer because we have such good video links, is absolutely critical. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening to me. I hope it was interesting, and I know there is scope for questions at the end, so I shall hand over to the next person.
Thanks so much, Alice. There was a lot to reflect on in that presentation, and we already have questions popping up. We are going to reserve the questions for a discussion at the end after Piero's comments. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Piero, who is our Chief Resilience Officer from Milan. And Piero has over 10 years of experience in climate change policy and urban resilience. He is, as I mentioned, the resilience officer in the city, as well as the city lead for the H2020 Lighthouse Project Sharing Cities. And he's an advisor to the Italian Ministry of Environment, Land and Sea on urban adaptation policy for climate change. So Piero, again, thank you for being with us, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you from around the world. Let me start first to thank all the people from around the world that were expressing their solidarity to the city of Milan, to the community. And thanks very much for all the doctor, the nursery, and all the people that are facing the emergency, the real emergency in the hospital. They are our angel, and they are supporting all the community around. So, the situation here in Milan, as a front runner of this crisis, let's say, and the Lombardy region, is critical. But we have all the different national level, regional level, engaged to support the city, and all of us, and all of them are involved and doing all their best. As also Alice said, we as a city, we are adopting and implementing the decision taken from the national government, and then comes to the regional government. Here you can see all the different steps. Let's say that the first legislation comes to force was the 23rd of February. So it's almost a month that we are facing the emergency at the moment. And step by step, we have been moved from orange zone to become a red zone and a lockdown. So the situation here is a bit different from London in terms of timing, but hopefully we can be supportive to then understand what we are doing. Let me just highlight that the national government is supported also by the Civil Protection and the National Institute for Health. That is the scientific committee that is giving and supporting the policymaker in taking their own decision. Let me go through what we have done as a city. The first things, since the emergency started, the mayor has delivered different steps, different action. One of them was a first declaration on the 11th of March, application of emergency measures guaranteeing the maintenance of essential services and tax relief for commercial activities. Then we moved from different other decree as far as for mobility. We also move, and we have to be obliged to close the public green spaces to avoid agglomeration of people. I forgot at the beginning to thank also all the community that it's the majority of the community is following the rules and with an unbelievable education and cohesion on this. But even we have still to close green spaces and other public space in the cities to try to avoid any kind of agglomeration for the population. But let me go through each one of these situations. The first thing, it's since the 23rd of February was a lovely sunny Sunday. There was still carnival time in Italy. We start designing the city of Milan. So there was a question in the chat asking how we can ask to our colleagues or to people to think about the future. We basically have organized ourselves in 3 different teams, let's go. The first one is the colleagues that are dealing with emergency management, thanks to Cristiano Cozzi, Cosimo Palazzo from the social policies and emergency department. Then we have also another part of the administration that is working on support for the community that is not infected but forced to quarantine. So that is an important step because it's really the majority of the population, the one that needs support as well. And the third one is a task force working on the plan zero for when the emergency ends, because we are now facing the first crisis. but it's not the only one. At the end of this emergency, we will have the second crisis, is the economical and social crisis. So we cannot wait until the end to start thinking how we can respond to that, because that could be even bigger than what we are facing at the moment. So as Alice said, I want to really express the gratitude to colleagues of the digital department. In 4 days, we were capable to move 4,000 public servants from a desk office to a digital office. So we are now altogether 4,000 public servants of the city of Milan. That it's on smart working. What we have used, we don't introduce new tools. We use the tools that is already in charge of the city. So what we already have. So we started working a lot on Microsoft Office. And then it's something funny also, because we also need to sometimes take some break from this emergency. Now, after the first week of enthusiasm to be on smart working, there is too much Teams, too much calls, and the people are starting to be saying, oh, we are working even more than before. So that's just sometimes to take a break from this. But we also use other kind of tools that is open, like Miro. So this is why it's important to have all the public servants on smart working, because at the beginning, our mayors were supporting an hashtag that is Milano non si ferma, Milano doesn't stop. Because in the meantime, there is emergency, there is a city that still keep going, public transport, waste collection, support to poor people, homeless, and all the other kind of low-income people. So we need to keep the city running, and to do something like that, we need to have the public servant. The second element we want to share is the emergency management related to mobility. So there is new until the 25th of March, but will be extended in the next days. We have a suspension of the traffic ban in the restricted traffic areas, and also people that can also drive in the preferential lines. This is also for guarantee to avoid congestion on this. The second one, as you maybe know, the city of Milan and the city of London now we have a congestion charge. So we have suspension times of the congestion charge. So it's also important to avoid cost for the population. Third one, it's related to education. That is also something that is unbelievable for the country, but in general, now we have moved all the schools are online, are digital. Also, our educational program for low-income people or unemployment people has been moved to a digital platform that we were put in place. So we are now also moving education online. But at the same time, we also need to support family in not have extra costs for this emergency. So we have stopped asking the fees for school and for the canteen in the school. So there's also another important support for the family. Then what is also important was also to guarantee a kind of quiet and happy quarantine time to all our community. So together with the public library and together with the cinema library we have in the city, that is also our public, the Cineteca of Milan has made available several thousand of movie and films. At the same time, we also have more than 33,000 free download ebooks that was makes available from our public services. On the other end, what is important is also the administration services. So we have to reduce the capacity of our office to receive people. So for the services that have still to keep going, it's required before to call a number is 020202 and to take an appointment if the services requested is not postponed. Once you get to the public office, we have create waiting line and sitting line that is respecting the distance that we need to keep to avoid infection among the people that are on the queue. On the other end, we have more than now 120 types of requests that could be delivered from home. So also the digital, the online tool for public services already working. What we also have taken care since the beginning that is really important is all the support to homeless people. Dormitories, public shower are still partially open. On the other end, we can see later on, but we also have taken one of our public residential buildings and we have makes available for homeless people to keep them in a safer place. And all these kind of digital services was thanks to what we were moving through during the last few months. So about emergency management, about tax payment, there is two levels of tax payment that was now has been stopped. One comes from the national government. So the law decree named Cura Italia comes from the national government, has created a redundancy fund, is now have been provided €60 to all the freelance workers to compensate the March losses. Look, we want to highlight something. The city of Milan, it's an entertainment city. There is a lot of tourism in the city. And one of the categories of workers is the freelance. And this is the categories of workers that normally get out from the traditional worker rights, and is also from the traditional financial support based by the banks. So one of the suggestions is to look at all that categories of workers that have to be protected because are not in the framework of the traditional contract and workers. The other one that comes also is the suspension of all tax payment and contribution from March and April, from the tourism to restaurant to the event. And as well, we look at what we as a city we have done. We have a tax on waste is now split in 4 payments rather than 2 among all the years. We have been delay the payment for the public housing. We have also redefined how you can the cost and the taxes for the public space use. I refer to this because especially at the beginning, we decided to keep open the open food market that they are on the street, because we were considering, and we are considering the food market as essential as a food provider to the population. But then, and that is why the main reason why we have to redefine these taxes. We have refound the kindergarten taxes that were already being paid, and we have refound the school canteen taxes for families. Schools, it was when the first environment was being closed since the beginning. On the other hand, last week, the mayors has launched a mutual aid fund. We have started this fund with €3 million by the city. We are receiving a lot of support from private and individuals on this fund. This fund will be used for different purposes, as well to support the freelancer, the shopkeepers, and the restaurant on this. On the other end, on the right side, what you can see is also the suspension of the taxes for, as was mentioned before, the waste taxes and the other one. But this mutual aid fund is only one of the funds that also has been created by the community. But this one was created by the city itself. And on the other end, as we said, and also what was Alice was said, because Milan is the fashion city, is the design capital of the world, as they said. Sorry for the other colleagues from the other city. But what we have decided is not to cancel the event, but to postpone the event over the years. I think it's something that it's not an easy decision, but the decision to not cancel it, but to postpone is to still have a clear program for recovering after the end of the emergency. So we were supposed to have the design week at the end of April. We have been moved late June. And all the other events have been rescheduled since the end of May until September. That could be even changed based on the emergency, how long it will come. But we need to keep this working. One other important thing is that a lot of our public in a museum, as the Triennale, has opened their gallery for free from digital, but also the Triennale and the other museum and the other cultural building and activities has been moved from face-to-face, from live to digital. So there is a plenty of initiatives that are now going on digital, because this is also the way how we believe we can try to support the community and get them busy and taking a lot of events. Just to joke, the aperitif is still going. It's not anymore on the Navigli, it's on Teams or on Zoom or on the other platforms. So we still are enjoying our aperitif as Milanese all together, even if we are from distance. On the other hand, as was something similar to Alice, we have created, on the right side, you can see Milan Aiuta. It's emergency partnership. There is plenty of association and plenty of organizations that are supporting to give support from different, for different kind of needs. As was saying Alice, we also try to have all the definition, all the communication in different language. We don't have so much language as London, but we are closing to have it as London as soon. So here is Milan Aiuta that is working for the NGO. On the other end, on the left side, the cities also start to collect the candidature of volunteering people. Especially volunteering people have been supporting for elderly or for big family, but at the same time, we also taking care of all the people that were on volunteer quarantine, or the people that maybe they were infected, they recon themselves, they become healthy again, and when they get out from the hospital, maybe they have the family in quarantine, so basically they don't have a house. So we are now working together with a kind of sharing platform. Yesterday, Airbnb and Sweetcast, two platforms in the city, working in the city, and they start offering free house for doctor, for nursery, and for all the people in the hospital. But at the same time, we are also working with them to identify how we can even support it for these people that get out from the virus. They get out, they recover from the quarantine, and they can get a proper housing. Speaking about food, we have created 7 apps to provide food every day to families that live in poverty. This has been done with in cooperation between the municipality and the private firm. I want to thank personally all colleagues from the food policy unit, but because this kind of great support we are giving an organization to guarantee food to all the community comes through our food pact that was launched during the Expo in 2015. So this is also how we can see when we are a vision and we move from vision to implementation, how it could be helpful also to managing such a big emergency as we are at the moment. Then we are already working on the task force working on Plan Zero. And we are trying to understand how we can increase the resilience of our cities during all the day. So we have kind of 3 main pillars. Is green wayfinding is one of the options. How we can use public infrastructures also during the emergency. And we were like designing. We have a program, an open forest program, 3 million trees before 2030. How we can plant the tree to have then the proper line to maintain distance in case of another pandemic. So that it's something interesting, how we can rethink in the urban design also to think about an emergency like that. The digital infrastructures, that is a key question. Now we are seeing how all our life is based on internet. So let's thinking how we can then move digital infrastructures, maybe also have more public owned infrastructures in this. And then the environmental transition is a big opportunity. I will show something at the end, one of, let's say, good news of this time. Then there is a lot of other projects and initiatives coming from the national level and then the regional level. So we have a lot of plenty of ideas, open calls for ideas, open online courses and so on, virtual events. That is comes from different kind of initiative from the private sector. So let me just say that what is the good news from this terrible situation, and just like me thinking about the future and the next step. This is a video created by the European Space Agency that shows screen how the pollution over, was Milan before the crisis. And this is at the end. So that could be also makes us thinking about what could be the future of the globe and of our cities. as yesterday the International Energy Agency director said, this is a huge opportunity to move through an environmental and sustainable transition and social transition in the next few months. So I try to make all what we are doing, that it's there's still not enough because we need to do more in this slide. And this is something that is comes, andrà tutto bene, everything is going to be okay. This is what the kids are now having. Everywhere you walk around the city, you can see all of this. So once again, thank you all around the globe to express your solidarity. And what is for sure here, that it's alone we cannot do nothing. It's all together we can make the difference. We come back to the normality soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Piero. And thank you again, Alice. I think both of those presentations have given a lot of food for thought, and we have a number of questions that have come in. I'm going to address them in two kind of tranches. There are a number of questions that have come in about what's happening now, and there's another selection of questions that are about how you start thinking now about planning for the future and this new concept of a new normal that you've both mentioned in different ways. So first, starting with what's happening now, we have a very specific question that reflects back, Alice, to how the volunteers have been organized. And it's an amazing show of solidarity, says Naufal Khan, who's from our Singapore Resilience team, to see all the community volunteers who have come out. How did the volunteers organize, and how fast? And are there similar characteristics? You mentioned aging, and where are most of these volunteers coming from? On a related note, Piero, we have a question about mobilizing the private sector. Alice, you also touched on that. And so if there can be a bit more detail about how private sector actors are being mobilized to work with the city to meet your needs. And then also on that response, in that immediate response, I'm grouping a couple of these together. How are you thinking about the effects on volunteers and citizens who are being impacted? And could you share a little bit more about the measures you mentioned that are helping people psychologically to deal with COVID at this time? So maybe if we can first, Alice, come to you.
Thank you, Lauren. So volunteering, I think we have all been very struck by quite how much solidarity we've seen, and we certainly weren't expecting people to come from all walks of life and all parts of London to try and support the work we're doing. I would say in London, we rely for many different things on volunteers. It's quite a common thing to do. And we have used that at the Greater London Authority over maybe 5-10 years now to try and build a network and try and involve people before we ever had any major issues, so that we have a big network of volunteers who we can call on when this sort of thing happens. We have had a lot of notes circulating on Facebook and on other social media where people can fill in their name and their phone number and say, I can help with your shopping or other things. If you would like to, please get in touch with me on this number. And we're seeing those appear everywhere. And those are not even things that we have specifically organized. Lauren, I think there was another part to that question. Sorry. I've lost it on my notes.
There was a question also about the psychological impacts on the communities and volunteers and the measures taken to help with that. And then the other piece was about private sector, which you can offer some insight on, and also we'll turn to Piero on that one as well.
So we are not there yet with the psychological support. I think it's something that we are talking to with our voluntary sector at the moment, and with organisations that voluntarily supply advice. We have websites being set up at the moment to provide advice on people who are at home and maybe lonely and isolated. But I think there is a lot more work for us to do there at the moment. We're focusing specifically on people who are isolated and do not normally have much contact, for whom that will now be much more extreme. With the private sector, we have had so many offers of help. It's unbelievable. Again, like with the volunteers, we have been humbled by how many people really want to play a part in this. For us, I think the challenge is we have started work with businesses and the business sector who are already involved in the emergency response and who already understand how our emergency response works. At the moment, we're trying to crack how we expand that. And I don't have an answer about how we're going to take that forward at the moment, but we're certainly working on it.
Thank you, Alice. I think this is really coming around to an important point, which is cities really are in the middle of this, and we have not solved all of these issues. And part of this dialogue is to bring out those solutions and to share them. So I would also say there are more than 200 people on the line at this moment, getting late into the hour still. So if there are experiences that anyone else wants to share, this is an open forum, and you can send us an email after the webinar and we can share that information as well. Piero, over to you quickly, and then I do want to save some time for us to talk about the forward looking and starting to plan for that plan 0 now as well. Anything that you would like to share about private sector engagement?
Yeah, well, the private sector was since the beginning really supportive, as the same as Alice. I want to highlight something that is a lesson learned, that we also have to be prepared in the future to have a private sector that is capable to have a double use, to switch from one production to the others. Sometimes we take too much time to move from, let's say, some of the producer of parfum is now moving to produce a hygienizer for the hand. So this kind of switch of the production is essential for the future. We need to stop to thinking on the silos, and we need to be prepared to have also be supportive as economy on this. On the other hand, the private sector, as we didn't even need to engage because it was already engaged, and we have plenty of offers from technological point of view, from the real estate to food producer. The food producers are amazing. They are delivering food for free as well to support the low income people. And what is important at the same time is to try also to organize the engagement of the private sector and give specific needs, and to be clear on what you need and how you can move. Just to say, we have to decide as government, the national government, to keep the private company working, the essential, and not only. So we need to keep the economy going. Let me just, I see a question that is related to this. Someone is asking me about if we consider the cost of this action on the budget. Well, there is another topic. How much we are losing from our budget, because we are increasing the expenditure, but we are losing money from tourism, taxes, and the others. So it's not how much this action impact on the budget, is how much is emergency impact of the budget. And there is no time to thinking about go debt, is the time to give answer. So if we spend more, it's a good decision.
Thank you, Piero. We are going to move on to that forward looking, and I'll feature some of the planning questions in just a moment. But for those who have to leave exactly in 6 minutes, wherever you are, in whatever time zone you are in, I do want to mention that we are continuing this speaker series every Thursday, and we are basing the topics on city demand. And I noticed that there are a number of questions in the Q&A section about the use of smart technologies or technologies in general to stem transmission, and also to promote interaction during this time. Next week, in fact, we will have a professor from Tsinghua University in China who is going to be talking about the use of smart technologies to combat COVID-19 and respond with resilience in China. And we will also have the Chief Information Officer from the city of Tel Aviv, who will share about their experiences using technology to respond to the virus. So for those who are interested, you will see an invitation coming out from us on Monday about that with more information. And so please register if you're interested in that. Okay, returning to our Q&A. We have a number of questions, one from the co-chair of our Global Resilient Cities Network Steering Committee, Grania Long from Belfast. She is asking about the focus on the new normal, planning for the future. How do we make sure that the climate crisis is not deprioritized in the city while we manage responses? And in a similar vein, we had a number of people asking for more information on what does it mean to have a new normal, and the Plan Zero specifically, Piero, and green pathways were of interest to both the colleagues from the Paris Resilience Office and also Athens. So if you could perhaps start, Alice, what is London thinking about more specifically as you talk about that plan for the future? And then Piero will turn the microphone to you.
Thanks, Lauren. So I think to pick up Grania's question, I think with the climate crisis in mind, there is a balance that we're going to need to strike between what is clearly going to be a high-speed dash to rebuild the economy after where we are now, and a kind of finding a way to be able to influence that for positive change. And I think the way we want to start trying to think about this is really understanding what has changed societally, what has changed environmentally. So looking at Piero's pictures of what's happening over Milan in the sky and the pollution, and also looking at other social behaviour and how, if we have indeed, how much more sustainable have we become, and really taking all of those different things and trying to understand out of the way we're now behaving and how that is different, what we can really change to make the economy keep working in the right way to keep that change up. Because I think Grania, you're right in your point that it's easily going to be lost that there is a climate crisis happening after this, and I think it's so vital that we don't lose sight of that. I think that was Lauren. Was there another part to that? Sorry.
I think we'll stay there for now. There's some additional questions about the specific Plan Zero and green wayfinding, which we'll pose to Piero. I also do want to remind everyone, if you do need to leave, it's almost past, but the speakers have generously offered to stay on for an additional 15 minutes. So if you do want to stay on with us, we will take additional questions. Piero, over to you.
Yes. Well, about the question from Grain. Hi, Grain, and thanks to be part of this webinar. Let's say that is the challenge. I mean, it's a big challenge. It's a big opportunity out of there, and it's how we can lead the Plan Zero that moving through the climate change crisis as well. Because as we said, we need to rethink our way of moving. We need to rethink our way of the economy, and there is a huge opportunity out of there to create a huge program of investment on renewable energy and energy efficiency as measures that could be how to recover all the sector of the real estate and so on. So I think the climate crisis in this case could become not a crisis, but could become the opportunity to recover the economy based on a more sustainable economy. So it's much important how we can now guide the identification of the economical support and the funds that it could be have at the end of this, moving on this. So yes, it could be a reduction, but it's if you go back to the business as usual, well, we are also not linking to the pandemic as well. And then there is still not any scientific evidence on this, but it seems that there is a lot of the cities are affected, the big one, also one of the most polluted. So let's thinking about this correlation. At the moment is not scientific proof, but there is something out of there the other way. The green way of funding, and I say hi to all colleagues from Paris and Noemi and the others. And that is something we were just having a meeting on urban forest 2 days ago. and the person say, why we are not planting tree? It's 1 meter enough from the other, because it's exactly how we should stand in the line out of the supermarket in the meantime I'm going for food. So basically we realized that based on how you design the urban space, you can also have a separation between the people in the meantime there is an emergency like this one. So it's also when you think about the trees could become also a kind of a signal that helps also to manage the emergency. And the same with the other kind of element of the urban design. So it's what we are now thinking, how we can use the existing program that we want to keep going after the end of the emergency, but use this program to also be supporting for future emergency. So this is the plan zero. The plan zero, it's not already something that is designed. It also comes from the opportunity that we can identify through the time. And we are more than welcome to speak with all of them, with all of you guys, to understand what should be on the best option for this.
Thank you, Piero. We had a comment just come back in terms of offering some support from within the network from Beck Dawson in Sydney, who said that Australia is finding that psychological impacts is a huge issue after the bushfires. And so government has put in place significant resources, mental health doctors and workers to support communities long after fires have gone, which leads to a question that was posed by Magnus Font from the Nordic Resilience group. And his question, which others also agreed and wanted to hear from you on, Alice and Piero, is what are the critical factors in the mind of the city, of the municipality, for going back to normal? What will be those signals, or has the city agreed on what is the critical factor for going back to normal?
Thanks, Lauren, and hi, Magnus. Thank you for your question. I think it's an incredibly challenging one. I think those factors for moving back to the new normal are maybe not completely clear at the moment. And certainly for us, I think one of the big challenges will be gaining public trust and ensuring that people feel confident that they can resume their daily lives as they would expect to resume their daily lives. And for example, that at the moment we're struggling with supermarkets not having things on the shelves, with our transport closing, and people are fearful that they may touch something, that they may come too close to someone. And I think actually that basic level of trust is the really, really core first step to making normal happen again before we get to systemic change and making the right economic decisions to support sustainability and good environmental thinking.
Yeah, I will say that we're quite the same as Alice said, that it's there is now, well, sorry, start from the Sydney. I mean, we are already facing psychological impact on the community. We are still increasing. Well, it's not what is not, we cannot find food in the supermarket. There is an increase of domestic violence. It could be comes in the next day, that it's a huge impact. And we are now, there's a huge discussion, for example, if we can still have sport outside or not, outdoor sport, so we can keep it running. And this is something that is important for me. When you consider people living in a city, you have to consider people are living even in 30 square meters without no balcony, only with a window, and living for a month or 2 months in 30 square meters. Yeah, it's mentally, it's really affecting on your mental health. So that is important. So what I think it could be something is a factor that it's when we can trust again to be out in the public space, and basically is when we can start back to hug each other, because that is one of the biggest things in terms of trust between the community and the trust with the institution. There is two levels here we need to face as a key factor. Is the institutional trust in keeping the emergency and then going back to the normal, but then there is also the emotional trust. Can we perceive that we are now safe? And if we touch each other, we hug each other, we kiss each other, we can be safe. That is the human trust, that it's an essential element of the key factor for the Plan Zero. And we should start working and thinking, which are the action that could be help people to get back together on the public space, in a square, in a parks, in a stadium for a concert, without him be scared that something could happen. So that, I think, it's another important element. And here we don't have to look only at technology, we don't only look only at health, we look at emotional and psychological action at the same level and the same importance as the other.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Piero. Those are really important reminders of the importance of looking at things at the same time in the same ways. Perhaps that leads us to one final question. There were many others, and we will collate these questions and we'll use them both to drive the demand of the future speaker series, as well as share some responses in them. There was a question posed by Arnaud Molinar from Rotterdam about how we will capture some of these lessons. So I'll just take the moderator's prerogative to answer that last one for the community on the line. We are keeping notes and records of all of these speaker series, as well as collecting experiences from around the network and with our expert partners as well. So we will be collating good practice, and we will make those available through our web channels and through the future speaker series as well. With that, the last substantive question that I did want to share was around vulnerable communities, in particular frontline health workers and low-income workers. There were questions about how both of your cities, in particular, having a tourism economy and in a very diverse community, can deal with these issues, and what kinds of specialized resources might be needed.
Well, I can start. I mean, especially for the low income, as we said, we have created a mutual aid fund to support, and there is income coming from the national government. So I think that we should be useful to have since the beginning this kind of funding. We were capable to deliver this one last week within the first week of the red zone, because also there's a measures that give you a kind of support in terms of psychological support, because you can still have money for food, because that is also what it comes at the end of the day. So not waiting to look when we should deliver the aid fund for this freelancer, or as I said, the low income, but since the beginning, because that helps also mentally to be safe, that you can still get your money and get supporting on this. On the other hand, we also need to be supportive, and we are now dealing with the householder in terms of the rent, how we can be community supportive in this, maybe asking and working. What we have tried to lead this and say, on our property, we can delay the payment of the rent and the taxes, because it could be also useful if the private could also have this one with low income to say, maybe we can avoid for a month or for 2 months to have the rent you can pay back later on. So this is another support on these terms. And for low income is also meaning big family, and the big family is also support. We also give some money and support, not to babysitting, to some, also the babysitting could be possible. We are trying to organize it through the community in the district. So we have a lot of social street, is a community-based approach. So all the social street have been activated to support the neighborhood and the district things together to work and support on this. So there is income, there is food, there is social services for low income people, that is essential. And what is essential even then is how we can then give them a work at the end of the crisis. So that's, sorry to repeat, to stress, it is important to have a Plan Zero. And also we postpone the event also because we still want to keep this going after it. There is a question I want to say, we also need to ask ourselves, I said to Milan and London, but this is part of the job we are doing with Alice, all this entertainment economy, it could be the only way how we do in the cities. We don't have an answer now, but maybe we need also to diversify the kind of how we create the GDP of the city. It could be not only entertainment, could not be only financial sector, could be not only fashion and design. Maybe we need something different. This is an open question, is where we have to become resilient in terms to look how we can bounce back in a different way.
I fully agree, Piero, that I think this has opened some incredibly interesting and challenging questions for us on diversification. And it's highlighted that there are people within our city economy who are vulnerable, who we never specifically considered vulnerable. And I think this is a very big learning point for us and for how we understand economically how we work in the future. I would say the measures that we have taken here are similar to those of Milan. So nationally, there has been a very big financial stimulus for the economy, and that's focused on individuals and business, but it's happening at a national level. But what's really important for Londoners is the work that's happening on allowing people to take mortgage holidays, so that if they cannot meet their mortgage payments, that they will still have shelter and they will still have somewhere to live. Similar work is happening to ensure that people will be able to take rent holidays as well. This is not completed yet, but again, that has been the primary focus for individually vulnerable people, to make sure they can still have a roof over their head and they can still continue to cope. I think the next tranche of measures is likely to be around utilities and ensuring that people still have water and heat similarly, so they can continue living and coping. For the severely vulnerable communities, so those who don't necessarily have shelter, we are looking at bulk booking hostels and hotels to make sure that people have somewhere to go. It is literally that simple, and that's happening nationally, but that's also happening at a local level. And I think coming back to economically, and coming back to actually developing the economy after we come back out of this, I think one of the things for us that we're taking away from this is quite how important our cultural sector is. And although we may not necessarily always think of it as the economic heart of London, actually it provides so much to so many people that it's something that we should maybe not take for granted to such an extent in future.
Thank you, Piero, and thank you, Alice. We are coming to the end of our time, and I hate to draw the discussion to a close, because this is a critical issue that's affecting all of us, and your cities are on the front line. I'm so grateful again, and I just want to say thank you, grazie mille, to Alice and to Piero for making the time to share with everyone, but also to each and every one of you who called in to listen in tonight, and for the questions. I regret we could not answer all of them, but as I mentioned before, we will be collating these questions and both using them to drive the topics of the next speaker series, as well as be collecting good practices that we can share out within the network. So please do stay in touch. We hope to see and hear many of you on the next speakers series, and really look at how we can look at the challenges presented by COVID-19, and then respond with resilience and build back in ways that are going to protect the vulnerable communities in all of our cities, and come back stronger. So thank you again to everyone for joining this morning, afternoon, and evening, and we wish you all a very safe and healthy rest of the week.